Welcome to the Midnight Hymn Podcast, the podcast where we usually talk about Virgin Black, and this time we're talking about Spiine, or Spiine. Nice.
Do you have to emphasize the eyes because there's more than one?
There's two of them. Yeah. But there's another band called Spiine that is not this Spiine, so the two eyes are vital. Speaking of which, they are now on Spotify, which you need to go listen to this album right away so that you have some context for what we're talking about. If you haven't bought it already, which you should also buy it. And if you search Spiine, even with the two eyes on Spotify right now, they're still like, we think you mean Spiine with one eye, idiot. And you have to be like, no. And so you start typing in Tetraptych, and then it'll figure it out. So we're talking about this album because two episodes ago, we talked about their first sneak peek, which was a quarter of the album. And we're all very much in love with it. And now that the album's out, we had this little debate. We're like, we're a Virgin Black podcast, but also, practically one half of Virgin Black is doing this album, and it's also so much in the same vein of what we love. And so, we figure we gotta do this album justice. We got plenty of time to get to Virgin Black over the rest of our lives. So we figure, hey, let's do these. So what we're going to do, because we already did a deep dive into the first song, this episode is just going to be a very high-level view of our thoughts and feelings about the album as a whole, and then we'll scatter in over the next couple of episodes. We'll probably do another Virgin Black, and then we'll do another one of the other songs from Spiine, and probably stagger it like that, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. So this is the high level. Let's talk about this album, which is mind blowing in many ways. I think the thing I want to dive in first is maybe no, actually, I'm going to hold back, Ryan. We're going to get to your thing, which I think is amazing, which is a sort of interpretive framework for the whole album. Which is almost a systematic theology of Spiine.
I reject that. I don't want anything to do with systematic theology anymore in my life. But I hear you.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna say at the very highest level. So one of the things they're doing is one of the things that we all love about Virgin Black, which is I think the primary emotional or story engine of this album is putting dichotomies together, is taking a yin and a yang, the rot and the radiance, or the creation and the destruction, being trapped and being free, all of these things, and wrestling with them, contorted, strenuous, difficult, suffocating wrestling. Might be how I would pose it. That's my highest level, and it is. And I'm not just talking about the lyrics. I'm talking about the music, the vocal delivery, all is the art, the graphic art, the photography, the music video. It's all very well curated and streamlined is not the right word. What is it when you brutally cut away the parts that don't fit your vision? Whatever that is going on, I think that's...
Is it pruning?
Yeah,
the
pruning is a good word for it. But yeah, I think there's an austerity to it, but it's not... But it's also lavish. It's austere in the number of elements that they choose to work with, but then they deep dive so deep into... the parts that they do choose, which is my favorite way to approach art. So, I think that's enough yapping from me. Who wants to talk next?
Yeah, I really enjoy this album. It's just it's really massive. The guitars remind me, in certain parts, a lot of Elegant and Dying and some of earlier Virgin Black work, but yet. There's also just a lot more bite and intensity, and a lot more people always call them the squealies, but they're just the pinch harmonics on guitar. Not the Virgin Elect doesn't have that in some places, but I've noticed that a little bit more in listening through this album, and I definitely want to digest it more. But that was one thing that stood out, and like, thematically, I kept, it's so heavy. Like I kept thinking about the Tower card in tarot, which is all about kind of like upheaval and sudden change that you didn't expect, or even coming to your own personal revelations. Because there's definitely, like in the music video, there's a lot of wrestling with the self that is kind of present throughout the songs. But yeah, I have favorite parts on all of this album.
Yeah, right on. Excuse me. I don't traditionally advertise myself as a doom metal guy, but this one, I really like Requiem Fortissimo. I didn't like it at first when it first came out. It took me like 2 to 3 years to like really immerse myself. But Fortissimo, their doom metal Virgin Black piece, has really worn on me, and I've really formed a special relationship with it. And so when this came out, I remember reading on, I don't know, Facebook, I think, some consumer fam was like, "Where's the blast beat drums?" And Seska was like, "Yeah, we'll look at that in the next album, more blast beat drums." But I didn't really know what to expect, and yeah, as with any of their work, it takes me a lot of time to like really process it. I'm not somebody that just on the very first listen like has this profound experience. I have to really immerse myself, really study the lyrics, listen to the intonations, and then with everything Seska does, and now that I know Zen a little bit better, both of them, everything's so intentional. Like there's not a single sound or piece in any of these songs that doesn't have some purpose behind it. And from the chanting on Obluette, which is very interesting, to the way he sings, Bereave and Glacial. It's just so profound. So I really enjoy it. I spent like 3 days like in like a monk, like my wife, didn't see me for like 3 days. I went on this private pilgrimage, and I produced the Tetraptych pilgrimage journal, which is my feeble attempt at just trying to narrate my experience.
Yeah, I really like the chanting part. And how do you say it? Oubliette?
I say it oubliette because
Oubliette.
that's what I learned from the movie Labyrinth. But
I mean, it sounds more right than whatever I said. But I really like it around like 4:40 when he's talking about walls of shadow, and like the vocal almost seems to pan around the stereo field, like back and forth, almost like he's, I don't know, like he's either turning, like almost like he's turning in the same room, giving that impression, or like he's trying to talk at the walls as he contemplates about what he's talking about. And I just thought that was kind of like, from an audio engineer perspective, it was kind of a neat. It's normally not something you would do a whole lot of, but in that part, like I like it.
Yeah,
Walls of shadow, wells of sorrow, they call my name. That was a great line.
yeah.
There's some really, really badass lyrics
So
on
good.
this. What's another one from that? Memories in Halo to Paint Away This Mind. I like that one.
Yeah.
That whole part is hard for me to digest as an artist. That metaphor of like the painting and sculpting and whatever, but at the same time it's like poison and destruction, and it's an interesting dichotomy that hurts my soul in interesting ways. And I think that's one of the things I appreciate. It is challenging. Like nothing about this lyrically is straightforward, and probably musically as well. I'm not enough of a musician to be able to recognize, but there's so many things where it's like, okay, I see where this is going, and then like, no, subverted. Like, actually, it's not that. It's this other thing, and then you're left in this limbo of like, well, how am I supposed to interpret this? And I think that's sort of the soul exercise, SOUL exercise of this album, is like put you in this state of tortured limbo and see what comes out of you. What is it exposing about your character or your ideology or whatever it may be. I think that's what I love about this.
Yeah, I like what you say. It really keeps you kind of in limbo and really kind of guessing with each song. Really kind of, and like none of them really stay stagnant. Like they go through different phases. Was it Writhe or the towards the end? That might be the only one that stays more in kind of a similar mood throughout. All the other ones kind of do a lot more shifting and kind of paint the journey of the soul in a way.
I was gonna let's see. I had one thought. Going off of what you were saying about the audio engineering design side of things, I went into this deep dive off of Glacial, and when we talk about Glacial on its own, I want to really dive into this. But there's really interesting sounds. I don't know if it's in like the like guitar strings straining or something, but as a geology nerd, I know way too much about glaciers, and I've heard recordings of glaciers as they stretch and strain, and like there's these like pings and zings, and like it's just. And it's very nervy, like nerves being, scraped raw sort of feeling. Which it was very. I thought it was very subtly woven in. I don't know if it was purposeful. I'm just gonna assume it was. If so, brilliant work, you guys. And yeah, there's the hammering, like we talked about in the first song. There's all these little things that are scattered in that are often discordant or weird, elements that aren't what you would normally expect from, at least what I've heard from the genre, right?
Yeah, you're nailing it, and I love like Abluette or however we pronounce it is the one song where it's like really dark, right? You're trapped in this dungeon. The whole premise of the design of these cells is that you have a door at the top that can, give this false sense of hope. And what do? It's the one song where they gift us with a choir, i.e., some semblance of somebody else there. I just thought that was cool. At least it meant something to me. As I'm going through that song, I just thought that was so neat having that. Companion, if you will, in that moment of sort of isolation as you experience Abluette.
Yeah, I kind of feel like in that song, it's about building your own community. Like there's these paintings, there's portraits, it's talking about Caravaggio,
yeah.
and all this, like a gallery of stairs. It's I want to say it's so sad in the sense that bad comparison, but you remember the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks? He makes a friend out of a volleyball with a blood.
Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, Mr. Wilson. Right. That was kind of that. Emotional like patheticness of I'm so alone. My only choice right now is to like imbue, things that are not alive with life, so that I don't feel alone. And to me, I kind of get the feel of that third act, like low point of the album, of like, this is as as dour as it can possibly get.
Yeah, for sure.
But then Writhe challenges that and it's like, no, it can get worse, actually.
Yeah, supping the bile of man. Yeah, rats gnawing. So, there's so many. There's so many layers and sort of either ors that they blend together. It really is interesting, and you rattled off a lot of them early on. But they shift from the collective to the individual. On Myroblicia, there is all, I forget the line, but it goes from all to there is none but I. And Virgin Black did that as well, going back to like Velvet Tongue, religion has raped us, blah, blah, blah. And then they transition to the individual from we to I. But I see a similar theme on this album at times.
Yeah, to what Josh was saying about the imagery of the gallery, you think of painting, but it also made me think of like, I don't know, like dealing with your past, whether it's like referring to like a gallery of ancestors or guardian spirits, however you could see it through like a bunch of different traditions or what have you. But you could also see it like in terms of like who you used to be, dealing with, all your different phases of life, and then you're kind of forced to bring all that together, and it's all kind of looking at you at once. That's kind of what that made me think of, especially towards the end of that song.
Oubliettes reminded me, Josh, of Googly, 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 Be Gone from The Fall. Yeah.
The song also reminds me a lot of a band I was briefly in. It's no longer together, but it was called, I might have mentioned it on a previous episode, but Flame of Antioch, which I'll try and send you some of their old recordings when I'm done here. I don't know if they have any of them posted, but just a lot of that like earlier black metal style is kind of laced in there, and kind of made me longing for my earlier days as an adult playing guitar in bands and stuff.
Yeah, being in a band is fun.
Yeah.
I saw where Zen, I think, mentioned, he's got so many bands in flight, but I'm almost certain he was pretty clear that, there's him and Seska are gonna, get to work on the next follow-up Spiine album. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was. I can't remember the exact post, but it wasn't a vague hint. It was like, hey, I've got, I think, Antiqua or some. I don't know how to pronounce it, but he's got two other bands, Omega Infinity maybe, and but yeah, Spine's in his plans, I think, for probably in the next 2 to 3 years.
Awesome.
So that's cool. It's not a one and done band and album.
Yeah,
that's probably the better way to do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you end up like a band like Tool, and like 13 years go by, and it's like, oh, gotta make another album.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask about, which is weird, sort of like meta topic. So it doesn't apply strictly to this album, but albums like it. But I haven't had these same challenges with most music as I do with this one, which is how do you make room in your life for this? So you mentioned that you locked yourself away in a tower for 3 days, right? Or an oubliette. I don't know where you went, but I couldn't really do that. There were a couple times where I set time aside to just listen to the album all the way through, and there were times where I wanted to be reading the lyrics, but I find when I'm reading the lyrics, it is a different emotional experience than when you're just absorbing the pure aesthetic of the sound, even if you don't quite get half the words or whatever. But and then the other part of it is like from a hardware perspective. So like I was on a business trip and I listened in headphones, but there's like plane engine roar in the background the whole time, right? So it's like that, but it was like my opportunity to just have this block of time where I could again be able to do that. And then there are other times where I'm like cleaning my art studio and I'm like, let's do it now. You know what I mean? So and because it's so long and dense, it's not one of those things you just like pop it on and be like, da, 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 you know what I mean? So I'm just curious what you guys' experience were with the logistics of how you handle this kind of content. I swore I would never call art content. This kind of art.
The word's becoming more and more common.
The brainworms from working at Netflix are eating my brain away. Everything
make some content for the algorithm.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I like to invoke movement as I'm listening to an album, whether it's walking or used to go running a lot back in high school listening to albums, so I'm used to doing that. But I found that for this album, I spent a lot of time just like laying on my bed, just like it's just so massive, like every part to the next one, and there's only maybe a slight bit of relief before it gets back into like which the guitar production, I mean, compared to a lot of black metal bands, actually really good. Like the guitars seem so much more layered and stacked, in a way that it can be hard to tell for certain bands, but I mean, the idea is to not, perceive it too differently. But I think that just adds to the weight of how it kind of hits you, and kind of
What does
gives
that
a more
mean?
massive.
Does that mean they're playing the same riffs multiple times and just laying them over?
Yeah, I mean, they can be like, EQ'd differently, or even going through like a different amp. Sometimes that's how they do it. Kind of like the early Nirvana stuff was a lot of that, just playing the same thing over and over again and then stacking it. But sometimes you can get different colors and context out of using different pedals, or different effects on one layer that's not on another one.
I'm
The
imagining
fun of
the
audio production.
the lazy person's version of this in a DAW, where you just like take the exact same thing and just put different filters on it and just stack it on top of each other.
Yeah. That's the really simple way of doing.
Okay.
It's something I'm still learning to be better at, and even with an audio degree, is layering stuff, but particularly guitars, in a way that's kind of pleasing and also kind of more weighty. It's kind of one improvement I want to do for my
It
last
sounds like
album.
it would be hard to do without getting muddy. Is that
It can
the
be,
challenge?
yeah. I mean,
Okay.
if you hear, was it the band Spirit Box, one of the newer metal bands, or new to me anyway? I think they use like up to like 8 or 10 tracks of guitars on some of their stuff. So I mean, like that's hard to not get muddy without really good EQ and just like a good ear for how guitar should sound, I suppose. But it's probably what they're trying to emulate, like on the stages where they used to have like lots of amps at the same time. I don't think they do that, or that's more for show now than that actual utility. But.
And then there's also like so there's the hardware angle of logistics. There's also the like time of the day, time of the week, time of your life, that are all going to impact the way you hear and absorb. Because there are definitely times where I'm like in the mood or not in the mood for something like this, right? Where it definitely feels like it's appointment listening. It's not just pop it on while you're at random sort of thing.
Yeah.
I agree. I had to really zoom out. Like the first time, I found I was too, the lyrics were pretty heavy and they were hard, like to really follow. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I need to like really breathe this in and like zoom out, like I'm hovering over the earth, like, not 10,000 feet, but like 10,000 miles up, and I just had to sit with it and just breathe it in. And I found that as I started writing, like, I'd go through songs and at different intervals, like I would pause and just breathe and just sort of scribe, my like private experience. And that really formed a relationship with the album that prior to that, I just couldn't get out of my head and couldn't get out of sort of intellectually analyzing things. And that was a big shift for me in my experience of the music and what I perceive, what it was about. It's a collective, it's a cosmic, story as well as a private story. And so that's why I think Glacial is such a unique song, and I tried to capture that. I mean, I don't know that I'm right or anything. I don't even know that the word right is even applicable in this context, but it's just the imagery, I guess, is the better way to state it. The imagery is so cosmic in nature on Glacial that it really is like breathing in and absorbing this grief that's beyond just privatized grief. And I don't know. From there, I really, it was profound. But I can relate to everything you're saying, Josh. I'll wind up my point here. Honestly, I haven't listened to it in like a month because it was so heavy. I was so exhausted after I did my private pilgrimage work that I was like, yeah, I need distance from this, And then as we were getting ready to record, I did put it on in my 50-minute commute to work each morning, and so that was cool. But yeah, I can't imagine, mowing the lawn or something and listen to it.
Yeah. Oh, I do have a very random anecdote about listening to it with particular hardware. So on this same business trip, I was listening to it on the plane. So I was going down to Netflix headquarters because we were doing like a game business review, blah, blah, blah. But I ran into a guy at one of our business dinners who works like right outside the office of like the CEO of Netflix. And he just like, his desk is just there outside the office, right? But this guy's he worked on like Boom Blocks with Steven Spielberg. Like, such a weird history. Anyway, one of these like eccentric programmers who just like, he's a programmer for 30 years. He's got probably $1 million, he's probably a millionaire, but he's just like this totally laid back dude with a big beard, and you know what I mean? Anyway, he was, everyone he talked to, he's probably a bit on the spectrum. Everyone he talked to was like, you guys have got to try my electrostatic headphones. It's like, what the hell is that? So apparently it's an old technology from like 80, 90 years ago, but it has had a resurgence because there's some special stuff about it. But basically it's this magical technology using like tube, what are the vacuum tubes?
Vacuum tubes.
The hardware is just this giant box. It looks like one of those old computers from the 50s or something, right? And it's got like these tubes coming out the top, and then the way the headphones work, it's like electromagnetically aligned sheets of metal. All over my head, right? But anyway, he's like, you've got to listen to this. So he lures me to his desk the next day, and I'm listening, and he's like, okay, first we're gonna like do a song from the Beach Boys, and so listen for the cowbell or so, like every song, and then there was like a Beatles song, and then there was like all these various things, and he just tells you, listen for this thing. And they're familiar songs, but when you hear them in these things, you're like, it sounds like you are there. The whole thing about them is like presence, like you are in the recording room with them, and you can hear them. And it like there was a classical piece where you can tell where the violas are and where the the flutes are or whatever, just by closing your eyes, and you can like, wow, I can actually hear them. It's just crystal clear all around. It's miraculous. The whole setup, the one that he had, I think was like $30,000 or $40,000, all things after the headphones and the amps and the blah 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 blah. Wow. But what's really interesting is that they like, even with because the first thing I asked them is like, well, like the compression of listening to something from just any service online, right? It's all going to be MP3 or MP4 or FLAC or whatever these different formats are. Like, do you actually get that kind of quality? And his claim is yes. Like, granted, it's not going to be as good as the original recordings. Anyway, so what he does with these people that he lures to his desk and has them sit and listen to these headphones for 15 minutes, he's like, okay, now I want you to pick a song, what your favorite song, whatever it is. I'm going to add it to my playlist of things that, and so everyone, so there's this long playlist of people who have gone through this experience these headphones. So I was like, well, I easy choice, right? So we get on Miros, which I will still never be able to pronounce unless I'm reading it. Miroblissia. Yes. So put that on. I'm like, oh my God. And it is another level of the experience. I don't know what the production techniques, I imagine it was probably a lot of DAW, probably a lot of like home recording. I'm guessing just because, but with professional equipment, I'm also guessing. So it's not the same as like listening to a Beatles jam session like in the studio, but it was definitely this other layer of depth that there was no way I had any hardware that could get close to that kind of experience. So anyway, if you got an extra 30, 40K laying around and you want to really experience this, I highly recommend. Very weird side tangent, but I just thought it was really interesting. So one of the sales that you guys got, because he just downloaded the whole album, when I told him about it, he didn't have any metal in that collection. I was like, what? So anyway, wow. Yeah.
This one's like headphones I'd like to try, especially if it's using vacuum tubes. I mean, that's kind of, I guess, similar or the same technology that a lot of amps use. I have a Mesa amp that has a vacuum tube in it. Although now there's a lot of electronic reproduction of that
Right.
kind of sound. But yeah, you're right. Like I mean that stuff can really add some presence, or what's always called warmth, but is never really defined better than that.
Yeah. It
I
must
had
be
a
hard to
professor in
quantify.
college that was always a pet peeve of his, and like don't describe things as warmth, like go into more detail about it. But yeah, I would be interested to try those out.
Well, next time you're in LA, when I'm in LA, I'll invite you up to Netflix headquarters and you can check them out. Okay, so we've been going a pretty long time and we haven't even touched on Ryan's not systematic theology. What did you call it? A pilgrimage journal? That's probably a much better description.
Yeah. I can't believe you're using systematic theology.
Well,
It's so ironic because that was so applicable to me in my 20s.
I think a lot of us raised in Christianity who took it very seriously, like that was how you took Christianity seriously, right? It was like study it, define every word, define every interrelation between each word, define how you're supposed to approach, like all these structures that we pile on, and then like I think all three of us have gone through this process of like shedding that, but it doesn't mean that it didn't like influence the way we approach profound things, right? I think that's kind of in our bones now.
Yeah. Yeah, I say we just add a link. There's two links we need to add. One is the gentleman from Hungary. He goes by Dark Wave Metal on Threads, but his name is Zolt. I won't. I don't know his last name, but Zolt has been a fan of Seska and Virgin Black going back decades, and he wrote that amazing review of Tetraptych on just before it came out. On like Chronos Mortis News. It was a fantastic write-up. But you read it, Josh.
Yeah.
It was really well done. So I'd love to link that review and give a shout out to Zolt for his diligence and then I put this PDF file out on my Google Drive and opened it up. So that's out there if anyone wants to like you were saying, Josh, peruse it. I don't know. Did anything stand out to you, Josh, as you went through it? Not that I'm trying to deflect against talking about it. I was just curious.
I lost the link.
I think it'd be cool to maybe like show the diagram.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it really does give it some structure when you're experiencing the album. I go back to my earlier point about zooming out. This approach really helped me kind of process the music and look at how they're all interconnected. So,
yeah, I think obviously, if you've heard us talk for any amount of time, you realize that this is by no means Ryan saying this is the right way to interpret the album. It's one of these things where it's like, here's how I was able to like create a through line or like a guide for a beginner's guide, maybe. Like
Yes.
how would you put that?
I would just say it's an alternative perspective on how to approach it structurally. And I actually had a guided meditation I was working on where I was going through each song and I had these prompts written, and because I'm not Eric and I lack the skills. Like I had this vision where, you'd play like songs and then get to certain points and the music would fade and there would be this soft voice that would guide you through sort of meditative prompts that was all anchored in the lyrics. It was pretty powerful. I one of these days I hope I can pull it off, but I managed to just stick with the guide for now. So yeah, it's not it's nothing more than just one way to maybe think about how it's structured and maybe connect with the concepts in a way that enables the lyrics to maybe breathe a fresh life. That'd be how I put it, Josh.
Awesome. Yeah, I love this kind of thing. Just deep dives and analysis into media, like whether you agree or disagree, like that's not really the point. The point is like here's a perspective, that here's a way that this piece of art hit a particular person at a particular time, you know.
Yeah, I did I did a lot of reading on Carl Jung. I've been familiar with his stuff, but I never really immersed myself. And so I just reached a stage. I'm about to turn 50 in a couple weeks. And I don't know, maybe 10 months ago, I started, kind of diving into Jung and his approach to the psyche and the unconscious. And I've even recently taken up Jacques Lacan. And not that I want to bore either of you with Lacan. He's, very challenging. But it definitely has given me, just a different perspective on, how humans have really pursued, understanding, the human condition and the journey of individuation. So I did apply more of an, alchemy kind of transmutation perspective. And I included in the appendix and the notes some complementary thoughts. And, I don't know, Eric, how familiar you are, but I know one of the things when we met, was kind of you take a more alchemist perspective on this stage in life. And so I wasn't sure if, you had any thoughts on the overall album in general or how it applies. But I did my best attempt.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely come kind of more from an alchemical or hermetic or even Kabbalistic view of things now. But you bring up Carl Jung, like one of the things that made me think of him while I was listening to it was the phrase "all paths converge," which I think is towards the end of the Glacial song. Which made me just think about like, Joshua relates to kind of like a universalism perspective, almost like you can make all these errors and perceived mistakes on the path, but you may, if you're open to guidance, you can still find like kind of a way back to where you, I don't know, I want to say where your souls end up meant to be, but I mean, it could relate to, several things in life as far as your path and your goals. Sometimes I forget that in my goals and like, I took a wrong turn here. When it's like I can always kind of turn again. It's easy to get stuck in your head about that, and that's how music like this comes out. You display the suffering and the angst of going through something, and it's like, oh yeah, well I can still come back to where I need to go. That path will converge with another one at some point. So I mean that's one thing that kind of made me think of Carl Jung in a way. Of course, he talks a lot about tarot, and each card is really just kind of like or character is kind of like representative of a part of your soul, or that's one way of viewing it. So,
well, do we want to go into recommendations to round it out?
I feel like I've already given mine with Zolt from Hungary and his write-up. I'll stick with that.
That sounds good. Eric?
I would say if you can find them online, there was a band, I don't think they're together anymore, but it's called Soul. I think the album's called Upheaval. It came out probably like a handful, maybe 5-6 years ago. I was friends with one of the people, the vocalist in the band, but a lot of the atmosphere of this album kind of makes me think of that album, so I would definitely check that out. And that's Soul, like S-O-L.
For mine, I'm reticent to recommend something like this, except that it is so perfectly aligned thematically, because it is a video game, and a lot of people, and it's a side-scrolling, pixely video game, and for a lot of people, how is this connected in any way? Doesn't that kind of trivialize the
you
depth?
put me on the edge of my seat, Josh.
Yeah. Okay. So there was this game called Blasphemous, came out a couple of years ago, and Blasphemous 2 came out more recently, a couple of years ago, and I've been playing through that. So the world of Blasphemous is essentially if you were to instantiate Catholic doctrine and all the like weird, esoteric, fringy elements of it, and just manifest it into a world. It's not specifically Catholicism, but it is clearly aesthetically Catholicism within a fantasy context. But specifically, what like makes the vibe so similar, besides like there's visual themes that are like literally taken from Caravaggio and other artists of that period, and kind of Baroque and that kind of like aesthetic world. The characters that you run into have so many poetic lines that seem a lot like they could be in this album. I'm gonna throw a couple up on the screen as an example. But yeah, there is one character you meet that is it's not technically literally an oubliette, but you have to travel down under the city and down and down. And there's this guy, you never see him, you just like are like talking to him through the bars. But it's all about he's living in this filth and squalor and disease, and like he can never escape. The other thing that's really interesting, the other parallel I draw, is that it is also doing this thing where every character is suffering in some way, and their disposition towards the suffering, sort of theologically or philosophically, is that the suffering is good in some way. So it's not just a purely like, oh my God, every wretch is, but it just has a very similar vibe of like, what is going on here? How are these people or these characters interpreting what's happening to them? And they're all like extremely like phantasmagoric, like just weird. Like one guy had he was so faithful to something for some reason that his blood was turned to honey, and now he's got honey just leaking out of his mouth and like wounds on his hands. And then every time you visit him, he's more and more decomposed as like the bees are like burrowing into him. But the whole time he's just like, this is my penance. I'm so happy to be going through this. Yeah. So there's just all of this like very bizarre, disturbing, dark. And it's also just a hell of a game. Like it's just a great Metroidvania. So
is it the first? You said there's two of them. There's a sequel.
Yeah. So you might as well start with the first one. It's also great, and it's also very hard. As in, like, it's a lean-in experience. You're gonna suffer through it. And so again, with that thematic resonance of, and I think just as a human artifact, it has a set of demands on you, the viewer, interpreter, player, whatever it may be, that reminded me very much of this album, where it's just like so dark, so heavy, so difficult, but the care, the craft, the artistry that went into it makes that difficult exploration very much worth it. So
nice. I miss that series. I'm gonna have to check that out. I definitely like Metrovania type games. So
yeah, then you'll definitely dig it. Okay, well, with that, I guess we'll call it for there, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Like we said, we'll be going through the three remaining songs in depth. They obviously deserve that amount of scrutiny, and we'll be back at it in the future. All right.
Awesome. All right. Cool. See you guys.